Buongiorno, guten Tag, bonjour, and welcome to Baptiste.
Bonjour.
And welcome to you to this subscription video. You're here with me because you've been to both these two places.
True that. I've been to Planadas in Colombia back in, I think it was 2020, and then I went to Kenya with you last year.
And it's two interesting coffees, two different flavors. So I think we should start by tasting them. I thought it would be fun to prepare it as a little cupping and maybe take you through how to set up your own cupping at home. I've weighed out 12 grams of coffee and we're going to use 190 grams of water on this. And for dialing in for a cupping, my recommendation would be that you do exactly what you do for your Kalita brews at home, or kind of V60, that kind of filter range. Some people like to do a very coarse ground for cupping, but it doesn't actually extract very well. So do like a medium fine grind for cupping and you'll get good results. Then it's just getting your clean water at about 96 degrees Celsius, ready to pour, and start a timer on 4 minutes. And because we kind of know these cups from Acme, these cupping balls very well, we can literally just pour to the edge, and we know that we are very, very close to 190 grams. So we have 4 minutes while the coffee is extracting to tell you a little bit about these two delicious coffees.
It's a big difference. Colombian coffee, I like to call them a good round morning coffee. Full body, low in acidity, high sweetness. Literally the perfect morning brew. And then Kenyan coffee are always a bit more fruity, a bit more sharp. Tend to have a much lower body feel to it.
I think one interesting thing this time is that neither of these are actually single farm coffees, because Kieni is a cooperative. So that means it's a bunch of smallholders, so small producers who own a little piece of land, who will harvest coffee and deliver to the Kieni wet mill. There is almost 1,000 smallholders who are delivering to Kieni by now. So quite a lot of small producers. Planadas is different. It's not a cooperative, but it's a small association of farmers centered around this little village called Planadas. And these are all individual private farmers who could sell their coffee on their own, but because they have such little volume, it's very convenient for them to sometimes bulk certain lots together to create a larger portion of coffee, basically, that is more sellable. And the way this is done is that together with our partner in Colombian, they're cupping all the coffees from all these different small producers, and then they're basically making a little blend of somewhere between 5 to 15 of these producers that goes into this one that we call Planadas. So you might find other Planadas coffees out there because it is a city, but this little blend or constellation of certain farmers is one made exclusively for us based on our taste profile.
Yeah.
You went to visit like several of these farmers as well?
We started our trip in the region of Huila, which is one of the main regions in Colombia. And then Planadas is in Tolima, which is a different region. It's kind of an upcoming region in terms of producing organic coffee.
Yeah. Which is why we stared actually working with farmers there originally. Yeah.
That's the reason why we wanted to go and visit that region to kind of provide something for the demand here in Denmark, which is quite high in terms of organic coffee. It's a pretty rough little town, I would say. When we arrived there, we've been escorted by the police to our hotel. And then there was some kind of military activity over there as well. Just a bit of history behind it. It's one of the area where the FARC movement started back in the day, so it's still pretty kind of intense. And as you make your way through the coffee farm, you can still see some field with mines in it.
Okay.
So it's quite intense, but fun as well.
And that was my 4-minute timer. Sorry to interrupt you. So that means we now gotta break the crust. So you're saying the Planadas, quite an interesting area. Did you notice anything about varieties, the way that they're processing the coffee?
No, to be honest, it's very similar to what I've seen in Willa. Nothing has changed, but as I said, a lot of people are doing organic practices because it's a new and upcoming area. It's easier to start from scratch producing organic coffee rather than change the whole process. So yeah, it's very similar, except if you go to visit someone called Norberto, he's like a proper variety kind of a geek person, and he will dive very much into the whole science behind it. But in general, practices are quite similar.
And I think variety-wise, it's Caturra and Typica and probably Colombia and Castillo, maybe even. But
yeah.
But so a mix of varieties that are going into this, and a mix also of like slightly different kind of processing methods, all washed, but with these subtle nuances between each farm, which I find interesting. When you go there, you have this idea that it's one way they're processing in this region, and then you see like one guy is like fermenting for a few hours more, or putting things into a bag before depulping, and just these small nuances. The way that this is assembled is based on the cup profile. So these coffees have to be extremely clean, very sweet, and very balanced. And yeah, you're right. It's actually interesting that these farmers are doing all the processing themselves. So the blending from these farmers happens after processing. So that means depulping, fermentation, but also drying. Where if we jump to Kieni, it's different. It's all the coffees from these different farmers are mixed when it's as full cherries. So before depulping, the wet mills or factories, as they call it in Kenya, are much larger than what you saw in Colombia.
Yeah, it's a different ballgame. When you go to Colombia, it's everything is much tiny. For example, if you go and see Jaime Casas is basically doing his process in the kind of a basement. Where here this is like, a factory where hundreds of people are working.
Depulping machines here, they're like small single row depulpers. Here it's like 4 rows of a vertical disc depulper, and then I think 2 times 10 fermentation tanks. So it's a much bigger operation, and it has some benefits that then you might have a more skilled team doing the processing. But here you have a farmer overseeing the whole thing from start to finish, which I also think can be a benefit. All right, let's have a taste of these 2 coffees. This is how we taste and evaluate coffees before buying. But it's also how we test every single batch that we roast out here. So even if we're, for you subscribers, are roasting 10 batches of one coffee, we will be cupping all 10 batches to see if there's subtle nuances between each of the roasts. Yeah, and a good slurp is important to spray the coffee all over your tongue, but also to release aromas so you really get the full flavor of the coffees.
I love Colombian coffee. It's always like rich in like a very candy, chocolatey way.
And I feel this really has that. Like it's very caramelly and like nice, kind of like a little bit chocolatey notes as well. Yeah, it's a super balanced coffee for me, and but really good mouthfeel and like heavy body as well. What do you find in the Kieni?
A lot of berries, blackcurrant, blueberries. That's a coffee that we usually call a fruit bomb. I think it's pretty self-explaining.
Especially if you brew it as espresso, I really think that's where it really pops out. And you gotta be ready for more acidity and more fruity juiciness. But if you really nail the extraction on that as an espresso, I think it's unparalleled, because it's also very like full-bodied and textured and like a really oily mouthfeel as well.
I think for me, this is a lot of a lot of people that don't really know what specialty coffee is about, and people kind of understand that it's a fruit. This is the coffee that showcases the most. That coffee is a cherry, and coffee has a cherry has acidity and sweetness to it as well.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure, and I hope you'll enjoy the coffees. And we look forward to seeing you back in about a month for 2 new coffees.